the same boat.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So we've got kind of a range of cases in different areas. So what I thought I'd do is just give you some background on both TFL and Network Rail. I think it's important to remember that they're kind of different companies, because obviously Network Rail is private company and TFL is public based and run by the London Mayor. So they've both got different policies about their trackside maintenance. And we've been dealing more with TFL. So my sort of the slides I'm going to show you are more focused on TFL, but there are sort of overlaps with Network Rail as well. And on the Facebook group that I set up, there are a lot of cases on there about Network Rail doing exactly what TFL have been doing and destroying lineside habitat. So if I run through my PowerPoint, I'll talk through the slides. Hopefully it won't be death by PowerPoint. I will maybe not go into too much depth on some of the slides. And then at the end, if we maybe have a discussion about any ideas on how we can get them to both TFL and Network Rail to change their line side vegetation management policies. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, so this Facebook group now has got 101 members, and I set it up in February. This was as a result of actions along the Metropolitan line, which I will come to in a minute. 55% of London's tube network is above ground, so there's a massive amount of green land along our London Underground network. You can't really see it too well on here, but basically all the tubes around obviously the outer bit of London are above ground, and there are lots of green corridors along our trackside. TFL is the one who manages this land, and it totals 10% of green spaces in London. So it's kind of a brilliant way for the Mayor and the London Assembly to meet their green targets and ensure that they preserve this land. It's some of it as well, over 1,000 hectares of it is identified as site of importance for nature conservation, which is protected by law. So those bits definitely shouldn't be cut down. I mean, none of it really should, but those ones in particular are protected. Just giving a background about their biodiversity action plan. So TFL does have a biodiversity action plan about actually looking after green side space, the 55% of it that is above ground. But the last time they updated this appears to be 2010, so it's really out of date now. But as we know, we're in a climate crisis, and we really need to look after our green spaces, particularly in London, which is constantly being built upon. This action plan is pretty well laid out, and there are sections on each of the tracks and the kind of wildlife that you can find on the track. So I've put Metropolitan line as that was the kind of the area that we were dealing with. But this biodiversity plan shows the different kind of species that has been found along the track. So we've got slow worms here, which are endangered, and bats as well. And each line has different kinds of species and insects and wildlife that have been identified within this plan, but it is quite out of date now, 11 years out of date. Network Rail and their biodiversity action plan is much more up to date. They published one in December 2020, December 2020, so it's pretty recent. And they have allegedly a bold plan to improve the biodiversity of plants and wildlife along our tracks. And they have, as they state, they have a key goal of no net loss in biodiversity on our lineside estate by 2024, moving to biodiversity net gain by 2035. I mean, this is a great statement from them, but if you look at what's been happening, I mean, even in the last month, the amount of reports that I've been putting on the Facebook site, and other people have as well, they're still destroying the biodiversity and the vegetation along Network Rail. So they don't seem to be taking action on what they've written. going back to TFL, their three main ways that they state they manage our line-side habitat is pruning or felling trees, and they say they only do this if it's absolutely necessary. So if there's potential for them to fall on the track, or if they block signals, if they affect ground movement, or there's always the excuse of the leaves on the line. The second point is reducing or clearing vegetation, and that's to do with keeping cables running and accessible. And then the third one is stabilizing embankments, so there's no landslide onto the tracks. Okay, so just a little bit of a background about what happened in January this year. This is Karen Pillay, who was the lady who was directly affected by what happened along the Metropolitan line at Pinner. And she is the one who raised the alarm about contractors coming along to her estate and cutting down all the vegetation. She had set up Pinner Green Wildlife Group, Junior Wildlife Group. I think, Simon, you know much more about this than me.
Karen's just has joined the call, so she's on the call now.
Shall we wait for her to?
No, she's there.
I have joined, yes. Hi.
Oh, hi, Karen. I'm just talking about you and your Pinner Wildlife Group. Is there anything you'd like to say about that? I'm just giving background about what happened in January this year.
Oh, right. Well, I set up the Pinner Green Junior Wildlife Club for the local kids on the estate so they could learn a little bit about wildlife. And it's sort of expanded to a gardening group now. So we've started a project to teach them how to grow vegetables and such. But most of last year they were planting and trying to create habitat, and then TFL came along and chopped down all the trees in the middle of winter. And they didn't just take out the ones near the line, they took out everything.
Yeah, I've tried to, there's this one photo here, I think this bit at the back, you can see how it was, you know, deep in vegetation and trees. But I've got some photos of before and after of what happened. This is a photo of, there were badger sets, is that right, Karen, or further down the track?
There were badgers coming through just parallel to my front door, and I've located the badger set, which is right at the beginning of the road in one of the private houses back garden, and on the other side of the track. And they actually cleared all the trees from there last year and the year before, so they did disturb a badger set.
Right.
But obviously can't do anything about it now because the trees have gone.
Yeah. So I was just going to say about all the, obviously the green side habitat is rich in wildlife, and it's a haven for birds and for mammals and for endangered species such as hedgehogs and slowworms. So it's a really, really important for wildlife in London, and obviously along the Network Rail and the rest of the country. The contractors arrived in January. Klesher Contract Services are the ones who have been recruited by TFL, and they have a massive £1 million contract, 10 to 25 million pound contract, which runs to March 2022. And these guys arrived in white vans. I'm sure, Karen, you can tell us about that. And they arrived with chainsaws, cutters, trimmers, wood chippers. And this is a before photo and this is after, so they removed, you know, nearly everything. And Karen, you were asking the contractors, weren't they, as they were working, if they carried out an ecological survey, and they said they had it, or they didn't know, they wouldn't answer. Is that right, Karen?
Yeah, they couldn't say anything about an ecological survey. They were just the people cutting the trees. We tried to contact the vegetation manager. I tried to contact TFL. I've tried the mayor's office. Nobody wanted to respond, and nobody could say if a survey had been done of the trackside or whether anything had been done at all. I mean, I noticed there's a processionary moth notice on one of the oak trees, so they must have passed through there and seen what was there at some point. But they actually cut down trees with nests in them in the middle of winter, mainly wood pigeons and crows, but they decimated the wildlife that was coming around here. We've got about 40 to 50% less wildlife this spring than we had before, because all the nesting birds have nowhere to perch. The owls, you can hear them, but they're much further away now.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if they even search for bats, but one of the contractors said to me that TFL are trying to drive the badgers off the line because they get in the way of trains, which obviously they haven't got permission. I've contacted Herts and Middlesex Badger Group, and they couldn't find any permission or from Natural England saying that TFL could do this.
Right.
So
I mean, yeah, there's
we've
also
sort of stalled.
the Wildlife and Countryside Act, where it's against the law to cut down trees in nesting season, which runs from February to August. But I guess they try and rush the cutting down before nesting season started, even though there are still nests, aren't there, in trees at that time before February.
Yeah, well, they did say to me, birds don't nest in trees in the winter, which some do, some don't. But the point is they tend to use the same nests every year. Things come back to where they used to live or where their parents lived. It's the way nature works.
Yeah.
Like the salmon.
Yeah, there seems to be no awareness by the contractors about wildlife or even taking that into consideration. So these are just a few photos of what these are the contractors in action. This was really early in January when there was still quite deep amount of vegetation left there that hadn't been removed yet. And then this is afterwards, so it looks like everything has been removed along here practically. Karen, this was a guy up a tree. You were in Tesco, weren't you, which also runs along the Metropolitan line?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's just next to our estate. He didn't want to answer any questions, but he couldn't answer any questions.
Yeah. So the impact on wildlife is pretty devastating. The trees that were felled along the Metropolitan line weren't old, particularly old. They weren't diseased. They weren't falling down. There's obviously the fact that roots help offset flooding and land slippage. So with the trees being removed, there's more increased likelihood that there will be flooding and landslides. The trees support each other, so if you remove some, they're more likely to fall, and they also act as shade. They cool areas down, they act as a windbreak, and the wildlife don't have a place to live. Before, they were relatively undisturbed, and one of the few green spaces that is undisturbed by humans along the tracks, and species obviously are increasingly forced into smaller spaces. They can't travel to new populations and reproduce. They lack places to forage. The birds don't have nesting sites, as we talked about. So that's the impact on wildlife. Impact on residents as well is massive. Their health and mental health impacts, such as air pollution, because the trees have a brilliant role in playing to clear and clean our air. And also protect residents from emissions from the tubes, and there's now more likelihood of people developing lung disease, also incidents of asthma. There's the noise pollution from the trains going past. There's light pollution, all impacting mental health, residents' mental health. And there's also the fact that it impacts the property of the value of properties, as they have lost their privacy, and it's the outlook onto the track is not as attractive. So they are the impact. So what we did, and I worked with Simon and Karen on this, we contacted the press and we got articles published in Harrow Times and in This Is Local London. It was also published in Watford Observer, and the contractors even saw this article whilst they were working along the tracks. And I think, Karen, you said that they talked to their boss about should they stop, and the boss just said no, carry on, even though they'd read the report that had been in the newspaper.
Yes, that's exactly what they said.
Yeah. And then, so I know, Karen, you contacted quite a few people in TFL and there was either no reply or very hard to get a reply. And when you did get a reply, I've put just here, one person wrote, I understand your concerns about this program of vegetation clearance, but this is, sorry, it's actually, I can't read it all because it's covered by video images, but all of our work is safety related. So they're saying that they had to do it, but our argument is that it was excessive. They took far too much, you know, it was trees that didn't need to be removed and vegetation that didn't need to be cleared. So what we did was we set up a petition that was actually presented to the mayor last month by Caroline Russell, Green Party London Assembly candidate, and the mayor was supposed to respond to it before we went into the election period, but unfortunately he didn't. Yeah, well, he hasn't responded yet. In the petition, we asked for mainly these four requests for change in vegetation management policy by TFL. And the kind of key word there is excessive removal, because we've had, well, I've had quite a few people on social media say that you know, we have to remove vegetation and trees because it's a danger to life and to the trains on the tracks. But our argument that this is excessive, it's too much that is taken, because obviously it does need to be managed, but what they're doing is far beyond that. Also, we're saying that there should be biodiversity surveys carried out, which don't seem to be happening. So the ecological surveys, we don't seem to be able to see them. They're not accessible, even if they are doing them. They're not informing residents. So I don't think, Karen, you weren't informed that this was going to happen. There were no letters given to residents. And also, fourth point is that contractors need to be educated on effective vegetation management policies, because they don't seem to have any awareness about the importance of these green corridors. I've included this as this was actually done in 2012, so someone has actually written a report about this. The London Assembly Environment Committee put together a whole report asking for a change in behaviour by TFL and their line side management, but we can see for 8+ years later nothing has really changed. Okay, I've nearly finished all my slides. I'm just going to talk about some cases around the country just to show that this is happening everywhere and has been happening for a long time. So Network Rail, in 2012, Jeremy Corbyn secured a debate in Westminster about all the destruction in Islington by Network Rail. Caroline Lucas in Brighton also joined in that, and she talked about what was happening in Brighton. David Burrows in Enfield also talked about what had happened in his constituency. The Guardian has flagged this up in 2018, and they have talked about the Network Rail felling programme that had been happening, saying it was secretive and had been ongoing and that it needed to change. And as a result of that, there was an independent review in 2018 as a result of the Guardian publishing those articles. In Lincolnshire in July 2019, the Tory MP there wrote to the press and said that it was a scene like Hiroshima along the tracks in Lincolnshire. So that was then. And then in Wimbledon in 2020, there was this case of TFL cutting down all the vegetation along the district line. And in June 2020, this is slightly different, not cutting, but actually using chemical pesticides to clear the vegetation along the district line. And a lady confronted the contractors again about what they were doing. They were not aware. She called the police to try and get them to stop, and the police couldn't do anything. Chester, so more recently, this happened 17th of March 2021. Network Rail have been destroying all the habitat along in Chester, and Megan McCubbin, who's part of what's the program called? The the one with Chris Packham. She is a presenter on that. So she highlighted it and she's got lots of retweets of the images that she shared. Hampstead Heath, Network Rail again have been destroying the trees along there. That was in March. I think Martin, you shared that. And in Hackney on the 25th of March, it's Network Rail have been cutting all the trees down around Stamford Hill in Hackney. And yeah, so they would just have flashed through those, a lot of other cases around the country and rail, mainly in London. So our discussion is, if you'd like to share more of what Network Rail or TFL have done, and then what should we do to get TFL, Network Rail to change their vegetation management policy. So you can see from our example, we've tried a petition, we've tried contacting the press, we have tried social media, and also actually emailing TFL directly. So these are, I've just brainstormed a few ideas, and most of what I've just talked about, we've tried, but